Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with the races with the third eye. That would be every single human alive on the planet right now. Just because you can't use it doesn't mean that it's not there. You don't use your appendix, but chances are you have one, unless it has been surgically removed. Just because it's not used doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You still have your third eye, and you can use it if you do the right things. Now, let's see what Miss Blavatsky has to say about it. The subject is so unusual, the paths pursued so intricate, so full of dangerous pitfalls prepared by adverse theories and criticism, that good reasons have to be given for every step taken. While turning the light of the bull's eye, called esotericism, on almost every inch of the occult grounds traveled over, we have also to use its lens to throw into stronger objectivity the regions explored by exact science. This, not only in order to contrast the two, but to defend our position. Footnote. For suggestiveness, we would recommend a short article in the Theosophist of August of 1887, Esoteric Studies. Its author expounds therein quite an occult theory, though to the world a new idea. The progress of the monad concurring with the retrogression of form, 666, an example with decrease to the vis formativa. Wait, I'm going to have to go back and try and find this article because the author expounds an occult theory, the progress of the monad concurring with the retrogression of form. That says absolutely nothing. That's not saying anything, right? Like, that's not explaining anything. With decrease of the form, with the decrease of vis formativa, he says, who knows what shape vehicled the ego in remote rings, round or races? May not man's type been that of the Samayade in its variety? Might not the monkey kingdom of Ramayana fame rest on some far-off tradition relating to a period when that was the common lot, or rather aspect of man? And winds up a very clever, though too short, exposition of his theory by saying that, which every occultist will endorse. With physico-ethereal man there must be involution of sex. As physico-astral man depended on entities of the subhuman class, evolved from animal prototypes, for rebirth, so will physico-ethereal man find among the graceful, shapely orders issuing from the airplane one or more which will be developed for his successive embodiments when procreated forms are given, a process which will include all mankind only very gradually. The pre-Adamic and post-Adamic races with giants. See, this is again one of her, I'm going to insert myself, right? It says the Adamic and post-Adamic races. It does not say the pre-Adamic races, but she inserts that because it makes it fit with what she wants it to say. The Adamic and post-Adamic races with giants, their ethereal counterparts may possibly be Lilliputians, beauteous, luminous, diaphanous, but will assuredly be giants in mind. Now, once again, it is not impossible that there were some mindless forms on the planet and some entity came and took possession of that, right? Possessions do happen. There are disincorporated spirits. These things are pretty much incontrovertible despite the fact that they cannot be fully proven, right? There is enough circumstantial evidence to at least lend credence to the fact that sometimes there is some phenomenon beyond the explanation of people. Whether that is by spirits or not, that's up for argument, but the phenomena itself happens. People have extrasensory perception and know when their twin dies on the other side of the planet. That is a thing that happens. People have sudden intuitions about things and they come true. That is something that happens, and that can be enabled by this other realm. I believe in the theory of spiritual evolution. I don't know that I fully believe that it happened in the way that is explained here, right? There is some sexless race that just recombines itself, and then through a process of evolutionary spiritualism, this entity, which is more perfect, comes down into the less perfect. That is in part what I believe, right? I believe that we are here in a voluntary incorporation, that this is not a prison planet. And part of that is that we were with God, right? The soul, being eternal, was somewhere prior to being incorporated and will be somewhere when it leaves incorporation. The state in which we were disincorporated, as in joined with Source, is by necessity more perfect than this one. But we are here intentionally to learn lessons, not as a punishment of some spiritual being to be here in order to accumulate or eliminate karmic debt in the way that she absolutely does believe. And so while I do believe that we came from somewheres where we were more perfect, it doesn't mean that we were one of the 6th or 7th layers of existence prior to being here in the 5th dimension, right? We could have been in the 4th dimension, we could have been in the 3rd dimension, and this does indeed lean into that a little bit. But knowing the history of where she is getting it from is the part that really throws me off, right? These people were giants. They were 17 foot tall, but somehow they managed to put their penis in these things that are only 5 foot tall. And there were no problems with that. Okay. But they gave birth to these other giants who were huge and all of these things. Like, I don't necessarily believe that part of the story. Like, I do believe that there were giants. I don't know that they reproduced in that manner with regular humans. It is possible. There is no reason to believe it as fact, however. But the process by which she believes incorporation happened, I absolutely don't, right? I don't believe that these Diane Kohans are holding the planet and making it spin in the correct manner. I believe that they serve a purpose. That is true. We don't know what that purpose is. That is also true. Back to the text. It may be complained by some that too little is said of the physical human side of the extinct races in this history of their growth and evolution. Much more might be said, assuredly, if simple prudence did not make us hesitate at the threshold of every new revelation. That which finds its possibility and landmarks in the discoveries of modern science is given. All that of which exact knowledge knows nothing, and upon which it is unable to speculate, and therefore denies as facts in nature, is withheld. That's not entirely true. You're not withholding things that are not factual. But even such statements as these, e.g., that all of the mammalians, man was the earliest, that it is man who is the indirect ancestor of the ape, that he was a kind of cyclops in the days of old, will all be contested. Yet scientists will never be able to prove, except to their own satisfaction, that it was not so. You can't prove a negative, that is true. We do not have fossil records of any link between evolution and current state, that is true. But we also don't have any proof of a cyclops at all. Now, that is probably due to nefarious things, right? The Vatican and the Smithsonian do exist. but we don't have any correlation whatsoever to a cyclops. We don't. Now, the closest thing we have to correlation to a cyclops is a mammoth, right? The bones of a mammoth have a singular hole where the nostrils are, where their trunk comes out, and it looks like a giant eye socket because their eyes are farther back on their head. It looks different. Because of that, there is definitely a possibility that people confused this skeleton with a human skeleton, right? For reasons. We, being more scientific, wouldn't do that because we know how to classify that as a mammoth these days. But that's not to say definitively that this could not be, but it is to say fairly definitively that we do not have any reason to believe that this might be. Right? I believe in giants, but we do not have any corroborating evidence of it, so it remains speculation. Nor can they admit that the first two races of men were too ethereal and phantom-like in their constitution, organism, and shape, even to be called physical men. And like, this is the kind of stuff that really gives me problems. I mean, they weren't. They were not physical men. Now, you can make the argument that coming from heaven or wherever source is, because heaven is not a biblical concept, if we come from source and from more perfection, then you can make the argument that this is. But that is not what she is doing, right? She is saying these things were commanded by God to create, and they decided not to do that, but other ones did, and they came down and they created, and then these other ones that refused to create came down and took possession of those things. And that I absolutely don't agree with, right? There is no reason to believe it, none whatsoever. My personal experience definitely leads me against that. Back to the text. I'm going to quit trying to hammer that particular nail, at least for this video. For, if they do, it will be found that this is one of the reasons why their relics can never be expected to be exhumed among other fossils. Nevertheless, all of this is maintained. Man was the storehouse, so to speak, of all the seeds of life for this round. Vegetable and animal alike. I definitely disagree with that too. Footnote. It may be objected that this is a contradiction. That as the first root race appeared 300 million years after the vegetation had evolved, the seed of vegetable life could not be in the first race. We say it could, for up to a man's appearance in this round, the vegetation was quite of another kind than it is now, and quite ethereal. This for the simple reason that no grass or plants could have been physical before there was animal or other organisms to breathe out the carbonic acid which vegetation has to imbibe for its development, its nutrition, and growth. They are interdependent in their physical and achieved forms. Well, y'all, we have a science denier. If you are unaware, and I do not know how you could possibly be unaware, there is a great push these days to cast carbonic acid in a negative light. That human production and breathing has produced a surplus of carbon in the atmosphere for the first time in human history, and for some reason that is going to destroy us. But that is simply not true at all, in the slightest. There have been extensive periods in our very far history of much more carbon in the air. And you want to know what happened? Life was abundant. The more carbon you have free flowing in the atmosphere, the more plants can grow, because carbon is plant food. And one of the biggest drivers of carbon in the atmosphere on the entirety of the planet is volcanic activity. It does not require a single human being to expunge carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in order for plants to be able to breathe. That is not something that it has to be, right? They do take our carbon dioxide that we breathe out, and they do transfer that through photosynthesis into oxygen. That does happen. But it is not exclusive to humanity. Other animals also breathe out carbon dioxide. As a matter of fact, all of them do. And therefore, if humanity dropped off of the planet, the plants could still breathe. They could still eat. They could still grow. Volcanoes would take care of that, and animal life would take care of that. There is no need for a human to be here for that to happen. And on top of that, just to kick off this whole ridiculous thing about the carbonic acid and humans being the primary driver for climate change, we right now are at dangerously low levels of carbon in the atmosphere. We are almost at the point where plants cannot survive because we have decided to change things. Now, I don't personally believe we will ever get to the point where plants cannot survive, because when we get close to that point, volcanoes will pick up. I want you to understand the mechanics of that. When we get to the point where we are accumulating carbon to the point where plants can't survive, volcanoes will pick up the slack. That will happen. That has to happen. That is kind of one of the mechanics. And so, what she has said here is not true, and provably not true. So, if you got your butt hurt behind that, I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, all of what I just stated is factual, even though I will most likely get a little tag underneath this video saying climate change is caused by human beings, even though it is almost certainly, definitely not. Do we have an impact? Yes, but that impact is minuscule, like literally tiny. We are doing more detriment by removing the carbon free flowing from the atmosphere, which we are doing, than we are by adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Without a doubt, we are doing more damage that way. All right, vegetable and animal alike. As on Sophis 1, notwithstanding the innumerable forms which are in him, Zohar, so is man on earth, the microcosm of the macrocosm. That is just pure vanity, right? This is anthropomorphizing the entire planet. And I understand it, right? We want to think we are more important than we are. But it is undeniably true that there was life on this planet prior to humanity. That is an undisputable fact. Now, the complexity of that life, that can be argued. Whether or not humans and dinosaurs were concurrent can be argued. But you cannot argue that there were not trilobites before there were humans. You cannot argue that there were amoebas long before there were humans, right? Now, again, my theory of macroevolution and Darwin's theory of macroevolution do not comport in the slightest, but humanity is not original to the planet. Well, that's not the right way to put it. We weren't the original species on the planet. That is indisputable. You just simply cannot dispute that. We have zero evidence for it, right? You can dispute it. I mean, people can argue about anything, but if you are going to argue about that, understand fully that you are unsupported by anything factual. Back to the text. As soon as man appeared, everything was complete, for everything is comprised in man. See, this is that pride, right? This is, it has to revolve around us. It doesn't. The universe is immense, vast. I believe we are here on purpose, right? That does not mean that everything revolves around you. I believe that you can alter your reality, right? I literally believe in manifestation. You can check out the book. I give you instructions on how to do it. You can check out these playlists. I give you instructions on how to do it. I believe it is possible. I am living that it is true. But I still don't believe everything revolves around me. I've literally healed myself through the use of the Holy Spirit. I have removed a cyst from my throat. I have healed my shoulder. I am healing my back. I am literally manifesting health in my life. Like real change in my life. I am literally forming my destiny, pulling into me what is meant for me. The best possible scenario. I believe that that is happening. And I don't believe it revolves around me. This is saying that it revolves around us. And I don't believe that. I believe that all of creation is equally important. We use some of it, right? We eat animals, but animals are important. They're part of the food chain. That is part of their importance. And so we are meant to eat them, but we're not meant to torture them and hurt them and do those things. They are equally important to us. We're not meant to destroy the environment, even though we are meant to subdue the earth. We are not meant to be overbearing. We are meant to be stewards. That means if we are meant to be stewards of the earth, that means the earth is more important than we are. You are given responsibility for the care of the fucking planet. And you want to say you're the most important thing? Are you fucking kidding me? Go away. Back to the text. He unites in himself all forms. The mystery of the earthly man is after the mystery of the heavenly man. The human form, so called because it is the vehicle, or under whatever shape, of the divine man, is, as so intuitionally remarked by the author of Esoteric Studies, footnote 2, Viscount de Figonier, the Theosophist, August of 1887. By the author of Esoteric Studies, the new type at the beginning of every round, as man never can be, so he never has been, manifested in a shape belonging to the animal kingdom in a say. The author proceeds, he never formed part of that kingdom, only derived from the most finished class of the latter. A new human form must always have been the new type of the cycle. The human shape, in one ring, as I imagined, becomes cast off clothes in the next. It is then appropriated by the highest order in the seventh kingdom below. If the idea is what we understand it to mean, for the rings spoken of throw some confusion on it, then it is the correct esoteric teaching. Having appeared at the very beginning and at the head of sentient and conscious life, man, the astral or the soul for the Zohar, repeating the archaic teaching, distinctly says that the real man is the soul and his material frame no part of him. And I believe that. If you all are unfamiliar with my boy Bob Frizzell, he's got a book, and it's called You Are a Spiritual Being Having a Human Experience. That is one of the many, many good Bob Frizzell books that you should definitely check out. Man became the living and animal unit, from which the cast-off clothes determine the shape of every life and animal in this round. Footnote 3. It is stated in the Zohar that the primordial worlds, sparks, could not continue because man was not as yet. The human form contains everything, and as it did not as yet exist, the worlds were destroyed. That is stupid. That is stupid. Because the human form contains everything and did not exist, the worlds were destroyed is so anthropomorphic that I don't even know what to say. Other than it's stupid. Right, there have been many things, right? I try to couch what I say here in love. Jason, thank you for that recommendation. And so I try not to call things stupid. I really do. But there are times when it has to be stated. That makes no fucking sense, right? Again, there was a planet without humanity on it. That is incontrovertible fact. Now, when we got here, how we got here, the method of incorporation, all of those things are up for speculation. But the fact that we were not the first creature on this planet is not up for speculation. It's really not. I don't care what your spiritual beliefs are, right? I don't care at all if you believe that humans were the first thing to trot upon the earth. I don't even know what source material you're using. Like, literally, nothing that she has said from the Rig Veda intimates that at all. Nothing from the Puranas says that at all, right? Now, her interpretation of those things may say that. I have not read the original source material, but from what she has said from the source material, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. This was just people speculating about some things, and speculation is fine. You just don't get to say that it's true. Back to the text. Thus, he created for ages the insects, reptiles, birds, and animals, unconsciously to himself, from his remains and relics from the third and fourth rounds. The same idea and teaching are as distinctly given in the Vendidad of the Mazdeans as they are in the Chaldean and Mosaic allegory of the Ark. That is not what is... all of which are the many national versions of the original legend given in the Hindu scriptures. It is found in the allegory of Vayavasvata Manu and his ark with the 7 rishis, as in that of the rishis, each of whom is shown the father and progenitor of specified animals, reptiles, and even monsters. See Vishnu and other Puranas. Open the Mazdean Vendidad at Fargard 2 at verse 27 and read the command of Ormazd to Yima, a spirit of the earth, who symbolizes the 3 races, after telling him to build a vara, an enclosure, an aruga or vehicle. Thither, in the vara, thou shalt bring the seeds of men and women, of the greatest, best, and finest kinds on this earth. Thither thou shalt bring the seeds of every kind of cattle. Wait, do you mean that there were 2 seeds at the same time prior to man? You mean that there was cattle independent of man? Well, color me surprised. All those seeds shalt thou bring, 2 of every kind, to be kept inexhaustible there, so long as those men shall stay in the vara. Those men in the vara are the progenitors, the heavenly men, or dhyani, the future egos who are commissioned to inform mankind. You can believe that, but you don't have any reason to. Once again, if they had to build an ark to survive a flood and to populate the ark with the variety of the finest kinds of things on the earth, wouldn't that intimate that they were on the earth and susceptible to death? Would that mean that they were not heavenly but instead terrestrial? I wonder if maybe that makes a little bit of logical sense. I wonder if maybe if this person who was incorporated fully on the earth and in danger of dying created a ship from the things of the earth, that would mean that there were things on the earth. And if he populated that ship with other things that were on the earth, well, that would have to mean that there were other things on the earth, right? He built a ship out of wood. That means that there was wood. That means that it didn't come from humanity, or at least this human. The same with cattle, right? We have one example here, but it says the best and finest kinds, the seeds of men and women. That's not a seed. That's not a couple of seeds. That is seeds from all of them, right? Bring the seeds of every kind of cattle, etc., etc. Well, that implies that there was more seeds to be brought than just people and cattle, which by necessity means that it was not from the humans that it came. Did the humans save it? Possibly, but that means that they were terrestrial, not heavenly. Is that a hard concept? Am I off base with that? Right? That feels pretty self-explanatory to me. Right? If you have to make an ark to survive the flood, you were probably going to die in the flood without the ark, right? Isn't that how that would work? And if you were going to die, well then by definition, then you can't be ethereal, right? If you are under threat of death from drowning, then you're not ethereal. You're corporeal. That means that you are in danger from something physical. Back to the text. For vara, or the ark, or again the vehicle, simply means man. No. Footnote. This is the meaning when the allegory and symbol are opened and read by means of the human key, or the key to terrestrial anthropophany, which means if you decide that this means man, then it means man. But in literal terms, it does not. In literal terms, it means this vessel we have built, right? That's the literal term. You can say that it means something else, but then you have to prove that it means something else. And that is not what the fucking story says. The story says There's a flood. Somebody told this man to build a ship, and he did. Somebody told this man to populate the ship with the creatures, and he did. Now, you can make the argument that the Dayan Kohans told the man, but you cannot say that the man was the Dayan Kohans. You can't fucking do it. I'm sorry about the cussing. I know I try not to do that, but I'm annoyed. This interpretation of the ark symbolism does not in the least interfere with its astronomical or even theogonic keys, nor with any of the other 6 meanings. So you're telling me that there are 7 meanings to the word ark, and one of them is human. Okay. I can make that joke, by the way. I don't give a fuck if you get pissed off or not, because my hand did this shit for a decade, so fuck you. It doesn't anymore. That's one of the things I've healed. But for over a decade, it did that shit, so I can make that joke. Somebody's going to get butthurt, though. I know it. This interpretation of the ark, nor does it seem less scientific than the modern theories about the origin of man. As said, it has 7 keys to it, like the rest. Verse 30 says, "Thou shalt seal up the vara after filling it up with seeds." See my previous point. "And thou shalt make a door and a window self-shining within," which is the soul. Or it means a window. Maybe window means window. And when Yima inquires of Ahura Mazda how he shall manage to make that vara, he answered, "Crush the earth and knead it with thy hands, as the potter does when kneading the potter's clay." The Egyptian ram-headed god makes man out of clay on a potter's wheel, and so in Genesis does the Elohim fashion him out of the same material. What does that have to do with the ark? Nothing. It has literally nothing to do with the ark. This is you trying to read, again, something that you want to into the text, right? It's just making a comparison. He says, how do I build this physical vessel from which my physical form needs to be saved from the physical disaster? And the Kohan, or whatever it is, says, take the earth, build a vessel out of it. Well, of course that means that humans were built from earth. Of course that means that, right? Of course it means that the Egyptian ram-headed god made clay on a potter's wheel, because in India, this guy was told to make an ark to save himself from a flood. Absolutely, that means the exact same thing. I don't know how anybody can interpret it any different than that. I really can't. Fucking really. When the maker of the material world, Ahura Mazda, is asked, furthermore, what is to give light to the vara which Yima made, he is told that there are uncreated lights and created lights, and that there, in the Ariano Vega, where Vera is built, the stars, the moon, and the sun are only once a year seen to rise and set. And a year seems only as a day and night, a clear reference to the land of the gods, or the now polar regions. Moreover, another hint is contained in this verse, a distinct allusion to the uncreated lights, which enlighten man within his principles. Otherwise, no sense or reason could be found in Ahura Mazda's answers, which is forthwith followed by verse 41 saying that every 40th year to every couple, hermaphrodite, 2 are born, a male and a female. Excuse me while I take exception to this sucking sentence right here, because are you kidding me? Yet again, like this is the wildest chapter so far, right? Like every 40th year to every couple, hermaphrodite, 2 are born, a male and a female. Absolutely, that makes sense. Your insertion of hermaphrodite here absolutely makes sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever that every 40th year to every couple, 2 are born, male and female. It absolutely needs you to insert that it is a hermaphrodite. It absolutely needs you to say that every 40 years a hermaphrodite gives birth to a male and a female. Stupid. Footnote 2. Vendadad Sada. See also Bund 15 and J. Darmestester's translation of the Vendadad, Sacred Books of the East. Two are born, a male and a female, the latter being a distinct echo of the secret doctrine of a stanza which says, at the expiration of every 40 annuals, suns, at the end of every 40th day, the double one becomes 4, male and female in one, and in the first and second and the third. That is not clear. Right? You find it clear because you think that it should be. Which is clear since every sun meant a whole year, right? Now, that could be 40 days. That could be 40 days. There are 40 suns, right? It could mean years, but at the expiration of every 40 suns, at the end of every 40th day, sounds like it might be a reiteration of the exact same thing. It sounds like day and suns might mean the same thing. Now, of course, I can be wrong because we don't have the full context of this quote. She cuts it off early, even though there is obviously more here to be found. I wonder why she would do that. I wonder if maybe that is so that it comports with the theory which she is placing forward. I wonder. Which is clear, since every sun meant a whole year, the latter being composed of one day. Then, as in the Arctic Circle, it is now composed of 6 months. No. Just because the sun is up, and by the way, it is not up for 24 hours for 6 months at a time. That is a myth. It is up for a good 3 months, and then it is down fully for a good 3 months. Right? That's kind of how it works with the inclination of the axis. And so we do have a period of extended day, and we have a period of extended night. That is true, but only in relative terms, right? A day is what? 24 hours. It is how long it takes the earth to revolve. It has nothing to do with whether or not the sun actually is visible, right? The day is still 24 hours, even if the sun is in the sky for 24 hours. The day is still 24 hours, even if it is not in the sky for 24 hours. The day is the same length. That is something that is true. Now, the perception of the day can be different if you are a primordial aboriginal people and you wander somehow into the polar regions from the much warmer southern regions, or northern, depending on your hemisphere. And then you witness this thing, but the chances are you are not staying for the whole 6 months. Right? So you wouldn't see that. You would set out in the spring, you would arrive in the summer, you would leave before the summer is over, and then you would arrive home before fall. Otherwise, you're probably going to die. And so they weren't there for the entire 6 months. This whole argument is just completely unfounded. That's the easiest way that I can put it. It is unfounded. According to the old teaching, the axis of the earth gradually changes its inclination to the ecliptic, and at the period referred to, this inclination was such that a polar day lasted during the whole period of the earth's revolution around the sun, when a kind of twilight of very short duration intervened. And again, we have something to talk about. Now, I don't know this old teaching, right? I am unaware of any old teaching that says that the earth gradually changes its inclination. But that is definitely possible, especially pre-Copernican days, right? When we weren't objectively looking at sidereal space. It is possible in that setting. But, I believe the 12,000 year disaster cycle is a thing. And if that is a thing, and it is true the mechanics by which I believe that it will function, there is a period where the inclination will change. I don't believe that it is a gradual change. I believe that it is a sudden change, taking place definitely within a week, probably within a 24-hour period, where the orientation of the crust of the earth is going to completely change. It will still revolve in the same direction. Eventually, inertia will take that over. But during the period of transition, it's going to move, right? And we're at a 32, 33 degree inclination now, which is, let me not use that finger, I guess, is kind of like this. I believe that when the change happens, it'll be like this, right? It's going to be a 90 degree shift. There are reasons why I believe that. We talk about that in the 12,000 year disaster cycle. If that is true, then the axis of the earth would not gradually change its inclination, but suddenly. And that would definitely be recorded. If you were in a region that at one point was receiving equal areas of light, say for instance that the earth was not inclinated at 32 degrees, but instead stood straight up and down, which, by the way, is a possibility at some distant point in time, not now. And as it's sitting there and it's straight up and down like this, and you're right here, right? And it turns and it turns, and then suddenly it swaps over to 31 degrees, 33 degrees, somewhere in that area. That's going to change your sky. You are going to see things differently. Everything is going to be a little bit different, except a couple of points of reference will probably still pop up relatively the same because of a whole different mechanic. But this could be a recording of that. I do believe that there were people here when that happened. I do believe that that has happened at least every 12,000 years, maybe even as fresh as 6. There are reasons why I believe that, but it is still firmly in the realm of speculation. But you are more than welcome to check out the 12,000 year disaster cycle, where we talk about that in some extensive detail. After which, the polar land resumed its position directly under the solar rays. This may be contrary to astronomy as now taught and understood, but who can say the changes in the motion of the earth, which do not take place now, did not occur millions of years back? I believe that it will happen, that it is a repeatable pattern for, again, reasons that are outlined in the other video. Returning once more to the statement that Vara meant man of the fourth round, as much as the earth of those days, the moon, and even Noah's Ark, if one will so have it, this is again shown in the dialogue between the Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra. Thus, when the latter asks, verse 42, O maker of the material world, thou holy one, who is he who brought the law of Mazda into the Vara which Yima made? And Ahura Mazda answered, It was the bird Karashipta, O holy Zarathustra. The bird Karashipta dwells in the heavens, where he, living on the earth, would be king of birds. He brought into the Var of Yima and recites the Avesta in the language of birds. This, again, is an allegory and a symbol misunderstood by the Orientalist only, who see in this bird an incarnation of lightning, and say its song was often thought to be the utterance of a god and a revelation, and what not. Karashipta is the human mind soul, and the deity thereof, symbolized in ancient Magiism by a bird, as the Greeks symbolized it by a butterfly. No sooner had Karashipta entered the Vara, or man, than he understood the law of Mazda, or divine wisdom. In the Book of Concealed Mystery, it is said of the tree, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in its branches of the tree, the birds lodge and build their nests, or the souls and the angels have their place. Footnote. See Kabbalah Unveiled by S. McGregor Mathers. Therefore, with the Kabbalist, it was like a symbol. Bird was a Chaldean and has become a Hebrew synonym and symbol for angel, a soul, a spirit, or deva, and the bird's nest was with both in heaven, and is God's bosom in the Zohar. The perfect Messiah enters Eden, into that place which is called the bird's nest. like a bird that is flying from its nest, and that is the soul from which the Shekinah, divine wisdom or grace, does not move away. Zohar 3. The nest of the eternal bird, the flutter of whose wings produce life, is boundless space, says the commentary, meaning Hansa, the bird of wisdom. It is Adam Kadmon who is the Sephirothal tree, and it is he who becomes the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, esoterically. And that tree hath around it 7 columns, 7 pillars, of the world, or rectores, the same progenitors, or Sephiroth, again, operating through the respective orders of the angels in the spheres of the 7 planets, etc., one of which orders begets giants, Nephilim, on earth. It was the belief of entire antiquity, pagan and Christian, that the earliest mankind was a race of giants. That's not necessarily true. It is the belief of many pagans that mankind coexisted with a race of giants. It is not the belief of entire antiquity that earliest mankind was a race of giants. You can make the argument that her source material makes that argument, but you cannot make that argument for the other beliefs. Certain excavations in America, in mounds and caves, have already yielded in isolated cases groups of skeletons of 9 and 12 feet high. Then the Smithsonian came. Footnote: Darwinian evolutionists who are so wont to refer to the evidence of reversion to type, the meaning of which in the case of human monsters is embraced in the esoteric solution of the embryological problem, as proof of their arguments, would do well to inquire into those instances of modern giants who were often 8, 9, and even 11 feet high. Such reversions are imperfect, yet undeniable reproductions of the original towering man of primeval times. Genetics is a funny thing, right? If you don't have an understanding of genetics, it can seem like a mystery, but I am 5'10", right? 5'10 and a half, close enough. My wife is 5'6". My son is 6'3", right? I have the genetics in my family for people over 6 foot tall. She has the genetics in her family for people over 6 foot tall. Together, our genetics combined and created someone over 6 foot tall. My daughter is 5'4", right? My mom is 5'3". Her mom was 5 foot even. My dad is 6'1". His dad was 6'3". Right? Genetics are weird. They skip generations. They do things that people do not anticipate. Sometimes people have it in their genetics to be 10, 11 feet tall. It is not often, right? That is not something that happens normally, but it does happen. That is something that has been. That can be from interbreeding. Not going to take that away from it, right? That is literally what is recorded in the histories. That this race of giants and this race of men coexisted, not peacefully, for eons. The Native Americans on the North American continent, the Native Americans on the South American continent, have that same recording. It's recorded in England, it's recorded in Greece, it's recorded in Egypt, it's recorded in South America or South Africa. We have records of this, right? We do not have records of that being the primary race, except this one, right? This one, which she claims is the source and may even be correct in. It is possible that man devolved from giants. We just don't have any reason to believe that, right? Now, the records of these people, right? She's talking about these skeletons of 9 and 12 feet high. Those things exist, or did, but they disappeared, right? You really can't find them now. Now, I haven't tried in a very long time, so it is entirely possible that now you can and then you couldn't. But back when I was beginning to investigate this type of thing, all of the records, right, whereas newspaper reports, there are magazine articles, there are photographic evidence of people taking pictures with these bones, and those bones that they took pictures with are gone. The Smithsonian came and spirited them away, and nobody ever saw them again. The Vatican comes and spirits them away, and nobody ever sees them again. That is what has happened in history. That doesn't mean that it didn't exist. Doesn't mean that it did exist. Frauds and fakes have taken place in every single epoch of history. Somebody could have faked these bones. That is absolutely true. They could have been fakes. But if they were fakes, why did they disappear? It is much easier to prove that this is not true if you have the bones and they're actually made out of plaster, right? It is a lot harder to prove if they can be put together in a humanoid shape and they're 15 or 20 foot tall. That's a problem. That is what we're dealing with, though. Femurs as tall as a man. That is fucking huge, right? Like, much bigger densely than would be ours, right? That is a necessity by the square cube law. It is possible, but not anywhere's probable, that humans evolved from giants. These genetic offshoots, they can be remnants of that. They can be remnants of pillaging by those beings. That is possible. Doesn't mean that they were human, right? We can impregnate sheep. I bring that up because it is so fucking incredulous to me, but you can literally impregnate a sheep. A sheep can literally impregnate a human. There's no reason to believe that that is the only species which that was a possibility. That doesn't mean that it is a normal thing, but if there is Bigfoot, it is possible that Bigfoot could have sex with a human being. It is possible that there would be an offspring from that human being. Now, I don't know that there's Bigfoot. I don't know that that's possible, but it is not improbable that it could be possible. It is humanoid, at least as much as the other pithecoids, and so maybe, who knows, right? We don't have that information. We don't know where the original 12 feet high people came from, but there have been records of them for antiquity forever until they disappear. Now, her explanation for it, I don't. Interspecies is tough. It really is. I don't care how close it is. There's a reason why all humans can mate with each other, but not with any other species, with that one exception. So, there is no reason to believe at all that these giants were the progenitor race of humans. There is reason to believe that they were concurrent, that they lived together at the same time, and if they lived together at the same time and were antagonistic, pillaging and the after effects of that are a thing, right? That is how genetics have been spread across the entirety of the globe. And so, like, most Koreans have a little bit of Japanese in them, and that is not something nice. Back to the text. These belong to the tribes of the early fifth race, now degenerated to an average size of between 5 and 6 feet. But we can easily believe that the Titans and Cyclopses of old really belonged to the fourth Atlantean race, and that all the subsequent legends and allegories found in the Hindu Puranas and the Greek Hesiod and Homer were based on the hazy reminiscences of real Titans, men of a superhuman, tremendous physical power which enabled them to defend themselves and hold at bay the gigantic monsters of the Mesozoic and Cenozoic times, and of actual Cyclops, three-eyed mortals. Wait, what? Hold on, boss. Cyclops means one eye. Interesting. Three-eyed mortals, huh? It has been often remarked by observant writers that the origin of nearly every popular myth and legend can be traced invariably to a fact in nature. In these fantastic creations of an exuberant subjectivism, there is always an element of the objective and real. The imagination of the masses, disorderly and ill-regulated as it may be, could never have conceived and fabricated ex nihilo so many monstrous figures, such a wealth of extraordinary tales, had it not, to serve it as a central nucleus, those floating reminiscences, obscure and vague, which unite the broken links of the chain of time and form with them, the mysterious dream foundation of our collective consciousness. And once again, I will point out that mammoth skulls look like cyclopses. Footnote 2. See Mythical Monsters by C.H. Gold. I think it's Charles. From whose interesting and scientific volume a few passages are quoted further on. See in Mr. Sennett's Occult World the description of a cavern in the Himalayas filled with relics of human and animal giant bones. The evidence for the Cyclops, a race of giants, will be pointed out in forthcoming sections in the Cyclopean remnants, so called to this day, an indication that, during its evolution and before the final adjustment of the human organism, which became perfect and symmetrical only in the fifth race, the early fourth race may have been three-eyed, without having necessarily a third eye in the middle of the brow, like the legendary Cyclops, is also furnished by science. Wait. The early fourth man, without having necessarily a third eye in the middle of the brow. To the occultist who believe that spiritual and psychic involution proceeds on parallel lines with physical evolution, that the inner senses, innate in the first human races, atrophy during racial growth and the material development of the outer senses, to the student of esoteric symbology, finally, this statement is no conjecture or possibility, but simply a phase of the law of growth, a proven fact, in short. They understand the meaning of this passage in the commentaries, which says, "There were 4 armed creatures in those early days of the male females, hermaphrodites, with 1 head yet 3 eyes. They could see before them and behind them." Footnote. Vis-a-vis, the third eye was at the back of the head. The statement that the latest hermaphrodite humanity was 4-armed unriddles probably the mystery of all the representations and idols of the exoteric gods of India. On the Acropolis of Argos there was a Zoanon, a rudely carved wooden statue attributed to Daedalus, representing a 3-eyed colossus, which was consecrated to Zeus Triopas, 3-eyed. The head of the god has 2 eyes in his face and 1 above on the top of the forehead. It is considered the most archaic of all the ancient statues. A Kalpa later, after the separation of the sexes, men, having fallen into matter, their spiritual vision became dim, and coordinately the third eye commenced to lose its power. When the fourth race arrived at its middle age, the inner vision had to be awakened and acquired by artificial stimuli, the process of which was known to the old sages. Footnote 2. The inner sight could henceforth be acquired only through training and initiation, save in the cases of natural and born magicians, sensitives, and mediums, as they are called now. What it is actually talking about, right? The inner vision had to be awakened and acquired by artificial stimuli. That would be one of the keys, right? You have many different keys for opening the door. The most natural, best one is for you to do it internally with no external stimuli. But psychotropics open that door, right? The mushrooms that grow in cow patties open the door more cleanly than pretty much anything else on the planet. But there is still some remnants of the detrimental there. DMT, produced artificially from the roots of various plants, is a cleaner version even than the mycopian. But most of the other doors, or the other keys that open the door, the muscarida from the Germanic regions and the various other substances that people use to unlike the psychotropics, are dirty, right? They have attached to them lower vibrationals, right? The psilocybin is about here, the DMT is about here, but the muscarida is about the heart level. All the rest of them are very low. They have side effects, but you can open that door with it, right? You can open your third eye with those keys. I do not recommend that at all. you can, through flexing your third eye, reactivate it. I can do that, right? That is how I know this. This is something that I can say with a little bit of certainty, even though it is only me who has done this. You can flex your third eye, right? It is close to yawning, right? That is the best way to start getting the actual function of that. Now, I described this in my book, right? You can, if you yawn, see, I just made you yawn. If you notice way back here, like in front of the ears, but not quite, and deeper inside, is the best way to explain it, I guess. You can feel the tensing, right? That tensing is flexing the muscle that controls your third eye. What happens when you yawn, this is something the science doesn't know, right, is you are activating your third eye in order to bring attention to something, right? Generally speaking, if you are yawning, you are bored, right? But you're probably bored in a situation in which you need to be able to pay attention to something. That's just generally how it goes, whether you're in class and the teacher's talking and you're like, that yawn is you stimulating that part of you which learns, the part of you which recognizes the truth, right? As opposed to the lies of reality, there are truths in reality. And you can discern those through the process of awakening your third eye. The calcification myth, it is true. Your third eye has calcified, but it is because you don't use it. It is not because of water. It is not because of fluoride. It is not because of your diet. It is because you do not exercise it. In the exact same way that if you don't exercise, your muscles, they atrophy. It is the exact same thing. If you were to go into a coma as a fit, fully functioning, healthy human being, if you fall into a coma within 6 months, your muscles will atrophy to the point where they start dying, right? Your arms will draw up and you'll pull up into a fetal position. That is the natural occurrence. We, nowadays, exercise those muscles, right? You have a physical therapist come in and do the exercise for you so that the muscles don't atrophy. The same thing happened with your spiritual muscles. You can flex every single one of your chakra points, right? Even the minor ones. You have minor chakra points in your hands and on your feet. There are other ones, but those are there. You can flex those. You can flex your heart. You can flex your throat. You can flex your third eye. You can flex your crown. You can flex your base. You can flex your sacral. You can flex your solar plexus. You can flex all of them. Your muscles make it happen. You can move the energy through your muscles. That is real. That is something that I did, right? When I say that it is real, it is still in the realm of speculation because I am the only one that's done it. But I say it's real because I have done it. I can quite literally, through the force of nothing but my own will, alter my vision so that I can see things, right? I can see auras. Not well, I'm not the best at it, but I can do it. I can see the subtle energies around trees in the distance. I can see these things because of that, because I can stimulate my third eye through the process. And now, that's not the only flex. There is a positive flex, there's a negative flex, there's an absorptive flex, and there is a dispersive flex. They move in different directions. When you yawn, that is a forward flex. There is an opposite reflex, right? The yawn is the positive. I am pushing into reality this thing. I need to pay attention, right? There is a negative one, which is absorbing the information in a less invasive maneuver, right? You can flex positively and negatively. You can flex absorptively and dispersively. These are things that I talk about in the book because some things need to be controlled. Now, I have much more than anybody else in history put this out there, right? It is relatively easy to get all of this information. There is a wall because you have to earn information. That is the only reason. If I could give it away for free, like this was literally a direction not to give it away for free. So You can stimulate your own third eye. That is a thing. I fully stand on that, even though it is speculation. Back to the text. And acquired by artificial stimuli, the process of which was known to the old sages. Did we do the footnote? I think we did. No, yeah. The third eye, likewise, getting gradually petrified, footnote 3. This expression, petrified instead of ossified, is curious. The back eye, which is of course the pineal gland, now so called, the small pea-like mass of gray nervous matter attached to the back of the third ventricle of the brain, is said to almost invariably contain mineral concretions in sand and nothing more. Sorry. This is exactly what I was just talking about. This right here, just so you know that I am not pulling shit out of my ass, right? This whole thing was in 1888. Before that, and during this, we were not fluoridating water. We had not yet discovered fluoride. And so, even then, it was ossified. Even then, it was calcified. It is not the water calcifying your fucking brain. It is you not using it. The third eye, likewise getting gradually petrified, soon disappeared. The double-faced became the one-faced, and the eye was drawn deep into the head, and it's now buried under the hair. I do not believe that part at all. At all. At all, in any way, shape, form, or capacity whatsoever, do I believe that there was an eye in the back of the head? At all? That there was a face in the back of the head? At all. I don't believe that. During the activity of the inner man, during trances and spiritual visions, the eye swells and expands. That part is true. The Arhat sees and feels it and regulates his action accordingly. The undefiled Lanu, disciple Kala, need fear no danger. He who keeps himself not in purity, who is not chaste, will receive no help from the devil eye. Wrong. In case you did not know, I am not chaste. Right? Not willingly, anyway. Relationships are hard. Nobody has ever got all of their needs met at any point in time. Some people desire things more than other people's, and that is an absolute truth. But in no way, shape, or form could you call me chaste. Right? I like sex. I like sex a lot. I can do this. I can do this better than she could. I can guarantee that, even though we will never meet, obviously. You do not have to be chaste in order to activate your third eye. That is not true. That is patently, completely, and fully not true. You are meant to balance things, right? There are 7 virtues, there are 7 vices. You are meant to balance them. They are opposite sides of the same coin. Chastity and lust are the same coin. There's the extremes of each. You are meant to be in the middle. You are not meant to have sex with everyone that you meet. You are not meant to never have sex. Both of those are equally incorrect. You are meant to find the correct person to have sex with, to share your soul with, which is the actual mechanic of what is happening. You are meant to find that person. You are meant to have sex with that person, and it in no way, shape, or form limits you from having spiritual experiences. Anyone who is telling you that it does is a liar. Back to the text. Unfortunately not. The devil eye exists no more for the majority of mankind. That is not true. It is simply not used. I'm getting annoyed. The third eye is dead and acts no longer. Wrong. But it has left behind a witness to his existence. Oh, and by the way, the pineal gland is not pea-shaped. It is like a grain of rice. The witness is now the pineal gland. As for the four-armed men, it is they who became the prototypes of the four-armed Hindu gods, as shown in the preceding footnote. No, what you showed was that you assume that is where it came from. Right? That is different than proving that that is where it came from. assuming that these two things correlate and therefore causation has happened is not the correct way to go about. Right? You can look at correlation. Correlation is a strong tool for finding truth, but correlation does not equal causation, ever. It can be together, right? The causation could cause the correlation, but the correlation does not cause the causation. That is not. Back to the text. Such is the mystery of the human eye that, in their vain endeavors to explain and account for all the difficulties surrounding its action, some scientists have been forced to resort to occult explanations. The development of the human eye gives more support to the occult anthropology than to that of the materialistic physiologists. The eyes in the human embryo grow from within without, out of the brain, instead of being part of the skin, as in insects and cuttlefish. And here I think we have a little bit of a misunderstanding as well, because the brains in insect, or it does indeed grow out of your brain. That is true, right? But it also does so, as far as I am aware, in the insects and the cuttlefish too. What she is probably looking at here, not understanding, is the extra eyelid, right? That appears to be more firmly seated in the corporeal body than it is in the semi-ethereal brain, right? That is most probably just a misunderstanding of the science because it was still developing at the time. As far as I am aware, right, all of the eyes on all of the creatures on all the entirety of the planet are directly connected to the brain in a manner which they developed from the brain in the exact same way that we did. These extra eyelids are external to the actual eye itself. Professor Lancaster, thinking the brain a queer place for the eye, and attempting to explain the phenomenon on Darwinian lines, suggests the curious view that our earliest vertebrate ancestor was a transparent creature, and hence did not mind where the eye was. And so was man, a transparent creature, once upon a time, we are taught. Hence, our theory holds good. I, again, vehemently disagree with this. Like, the third eye serves a function completely external from actual observation of actual things. I might have to take a break. But how does the Lancaster hypothesis square with the Haeckel's view that the vertebrate eye originated in changes in the epidermis? If it started inside, the theory goes into the wastebasket. This seems to be proved by embryology. Moreover, Professor Lancaster's extraordinary suggestion, or shall we say admission, is rendered perhaps necessary by evolutionist necessities. Occultism, with its teaching as to the gradual development of senses from within, without, from astral prototypes, is far more satisfactory. The third eye retreated inwards when its course was run, another point in favor of occultism. And I am fully convinced and holding to that the third eye developed exactly where it is and functions exactly as it's supposed to. I have a thing called aphantasia. Now, if you're new here, this is the first time you've heard about it, what aphantasia is I cannot close my eyes and willfully envision anything for the entirety of my life. I got in trouble in second grade because I couldn't imagine a box. I literally got put in timeout for that. I cannot envision a blade of grass. I cannot envision a box. I cannot envision, with my eyes closed, anything whatsoever until, through meditative practices, I have been healing my third eye. Right? Now, I can activate this and I can see a different reality than what I can normally see with my regular eyes. But also, using that, I have been able to move the energy through me in the way that I describe in my book and use that third eye as a projector. I can take the energy and direct it through that particular section of my brain, and then I can see colors for the first time ever in my life. I believe that the third eye is probably where visualization takes place. Now, I am still working on healing that. I haven't been as diligent in my meditative practices as I probably should have for a variety of reasons, and that is something I am going to rectify. But it is something that has allowed me to, at least in small part, heal the ability to see with my eyes closed, right? I barely even dream. I almost never dream. If I do, it generally has something to do with reality and real life about to happen. That is just normal for me. Through this process, I have been able to visualize color for the first time ever in my life, right? I can close my eyes and I can pull up the color red, and then I can change that color red into orange, and then to yellow, and then to green, and then to blue, right? I can do that for the first time ever in 47 years because of what I'm talking about here. Right? I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. These are things that I fully endorse. And it is contra to what she is talking about. I don't believe that that third eye was ever external, that it was ever actually in your forehead or in the back of your head. It has always been in the exact same place. Always. Back to the text. The allegorical expression of the Hindu mystics when speaking of the eye of Siva, the Tribokana, three-eyed, thus receives its justification and raison d'etre, the transference of the pineal gland, once that third eye, to the forehead, being an exoteric license. Now that is true, right? When you cast it, when I do the visualization and I can actually see the red, it's like I am casting it onto my skull right here. It really is. It's like I'm using the energy to put a light behind it, and it's like a projection screen on my skull right here. That is a natural transference with exoteric license for the third eye to the skull or to the front. That doesn't mean that it had to be physically there. It's also the same for the seeing behind. You can use that for extrasensory perception, which would include seeing behind you. Doesn't mean that it has to be there. This throws also a light on the mystery, incomprehensible to some, of the connection between abnormal or spiritual seership and the physiological purity of the seer. The question is often asked, why should celibacy and chastity be a sine qua non rule and condition of regular kaleship or the development of psychic and occult powers? It's not. It's not. And that I can absolutely definitively tell you, right? That is a fact. I don't say that often. If you've been around here any length of time whatsoever, you know that I don't say that very often at all. It is a fact that you can do this without being celibate or chaste. It is a undisputable fact. You can do it when you're eating both meat and vegetables. You can do it when you partaking of drugs or alcohol. You can. Is it advisable? That's up for debate, especially the last example. Is it more effective? Possibly, but again, not required, not necessary, not intrinsic. There is no intrinsic need for you to not have sex in order to be able to do magic. That is a lie. That is somebody lying to you because it makes them feel good. Mrs. Blavatsky was not a fan of intimate relations, if you were unaware. Back to the text. The answer is contained in the commentary. When we learn that the third eye was once a physiological organ and that later on, owing to the gradual disappearance of spirituality and the increase of materiality, spiritual nature being extinguished by the physical. It became an atrophied organ, as little understood now by physiologists as the spleen is. When we learn this, the connection will become clear. During human life, the greatest impediment in the way of spiritual development, and especially to the acquirement of yoga powers, is the activity of our physiological senses. Sexual action being closely connected by interaction with the spinal cord and the gray matter of the brain, it is useless to give any longer explanation. Of course, the normal and abnormal state of the brain and the degree of active work in the medulla oblongata reacts powerfully on the pineal gland, for, owing to the number of centers in that region, which controls by far the greater majority of the physiological actions of the animal economy, and also owing to the close and intimate neighborhood of the two, there must be exerted a very powerful inductive action by the medulla on the pineal gland. All this is quite plain to the occultist, but is very vague in the sight of the general reader. The latter must, then, be shown the possibility of a three-eyed man in nature in those periods when his formation was yet in a comparatively chaotic state. Such a possibility may be inferred from anatomical and zoological knowledge, first of all. Then it may rest on the assumptions of materialistic science itself. It is asserted upon the authority of science and upon evidence, which is not merely a fiction of theoretical speculation this time, that many of the animals, especially among the lower orders of the vertebra, have a third eye, now atrophied, but necessarily active in its origin. Footnote. Deeply placed within the head, covered by thick skin and muscles, true eyes that cannot see are found in certain animals. Also, says Haeckel, vertebrate, blind moles and field mice, blind snakes and lizards, they shun daylight, dwelling under the ground. They were not originally blind, but have evolved from ancestors that lived in the light and had well-developed eyes. The atrophied eye beneath the opaque skin may be found in these blind beings in every stage of a reversion. Sense organs, Haeckel. And if two eyes could become so atrophied in lower animals, why not one eye, the pineal gland, in man, who is but a higher animal in the physical aspect? It is important to note two things. One, it is a progression and not a reversion, that animals have evolved in different manners. Secondly, those atrophied eyes covered by these coverings of skin in these atrophied animals is still located in the same place. The eyes are still directly behind the eyelids in front of the brain in these animals. Back to the text. The Hatteria species, a lizard of the order Lacertilia, recently discovered in New Zealand, a part of ancient Lemuria, so-called, mark well. And once again, we will point out that there is no evidence of Lemuria. Right? I believe that it existed. There is no historical records of it existing. Presents this peculiarity in a most extraordinary manner. And not only the Hatteria punctata, but the chameleon, certain reptiles, and even fishes. It was thought at first that it was no more than the prolongation of the brain, ending with a small protuberance called epiphysis, a little bone separated from the main bone by a cartilage and found in every animal. But it was soon found to be more than this. It offered, as its development and anatomical structure showed, such an analogy with that of the eye that it was found impossible to see in it anything else. There were and are paleontologists who feel convinced to this day that this third eye has functioned in its origin, and they are certainly right, for this is what is said of the pineal gland in Quain's anatomy. It is from this part, constituting at first the whole and subsequently the hinder part of the anterior primary encephalic vesicule, that the optic vesicles are developed in the earliest period, and the fore part is that in connection with which the cerebral hemispheres and accompanying parts are formed. The thalamus opticus on each side is formed by a lateral thickening of the medullary wall, while the interval between, descending towards the base, constitutes the cavity of the third ventricle with its prolongation in the infundibulum. The great commissure afterwards stretches across the ventricular cavity. The hinder part of the roof is developed by a peculiar process to be noted later into the pineal gland, which remains united on each side by its pedicles to the thalamus, and behind these a transverse band is formed as posterior commissure. The lamina terminalis, lamina cinera, continues to close the third ventricle in front. Below it, the optic commissure forms the floor of the ventricle, and further back the infundibulum descends to be united in the sella tertia with the tissue adjoining the posterior lobe of the pituitary body. The two optic thalami, formed from the posterior and outer part of the anterior vesicle, consist at first of a single hollow sac of nervous matter, the cavity of which communicates on each side in front with that of the commencing cerebral hemispheres, and behind with that of the middle cephalic vesicle, corpora quadragemina. Soon, however, by increased deposit taking place in their interior, behind, below, and at the sides, the thalami become solid, and at the same time a cleft or fissure appears between them above, and penetrates down into the internal cavity, which continues open at the back part, opposite the entrance of the Sylvian aqueduct. This cleft or fissure is the third ventricle. Behind, the two thalami continue united by the posterior commissure, which is distinguishable about the end of the third month, and also by the peduncles of the pineal gland. At an early period, the optic tracts may be recognized as hollow prolongations from the outer part of the wall of the thalami, while they are still vesicular. At the fourth month, these tracts are distinctly formed. They are subsequently prolonged backwards into connection with the corpora quadragemina. The formation of the pineal gland and pituitary body presents some of the most interesting phenomena which are connected with the development of the thalamencephalon. The above is especially interesting when it is remembered that, were it not for the development of the hinder part of the cerebral hemispheres backwards, the pineal gland would be perfectly visible on the removal of the parietal bones. It is very interesting also to note the obvious connection to be traced between the originally hollow optic tracts and the eyes anteriorly, the pineal gland and its peduncles behind, and all of these with the optic thalami, so that the recent discoveries in connection with the third eye of Hateria punctata have a very important bearing on the developmental history of human senses and on the occult assertions in the text. It is well known, and also regarded as a fiction now by those who have ceased to believe in the existence of an immortal principle in man, that Descartes saw in the pineal gland the seat of the soul. Although it is joined to every part of the body, he said, there is one special portion of it in which the soul exercises its functions more specially than in any other. It is important to note, the similarity between the eye of Ra and what the actual pineal gland looks like. And, as neither the heart nor yet the brain could be that special locality, he concluded that it was that little gland tied to the brain, yet having an action independent of it, as it could easily be put into a kind of swinging motion by the animal spirits. Footnote. The nervous ether of Dr. B.W. Richardson, FRS, the nerve aura of occultism. The animal spirits are equivalent to the currents of nerve or compound circulation. Chakras, which cross the cavities of the skull in every sense. Unscientific as this may appear in our day of exact learning, Descartes was yet far nearer the occult truth than is any Haeckel. For the pineal gland, as shown, is far more connected with soul and spirit, than the physiological senses of man. Had the leading scientist a glimmer of the real processes employed by the evolutionary impulse and the winding cyclic course of this great law, they would know instead of conjecturing, and feel as certain of the future physical transformations of the humankind by the knowledge of its past forms. Then they would see the fallacy and all the absurdity of their modern blind force and mechanical processes of nature. Realizing, in consequence of such knowledge, that the said pineal gland, for instance, could not but be disabled for physical use at this stage of our cycle. If the odd eye in man is now atrophied, it is a proof that, as in the lower animal, it has once been active, for nature never creates the smallest, the most insignificant form without some definite purpose and use. It was an active organ, we say, at that stage of evolution when the spiritual elements in man reigned supreme over the hardly nascent intellectual and psychic elements. And as the cycle ran down towards that point when the physiological senses were developed by and went pari passu with the growth and consolidation of the physical man, the interminable and complex vicissitudes and tribulations of zoological development, that median eye ended by atrophying along with the early spiritual and purely psychic characteristics in man. The eye is the mirror and also the window of the soul, says popular wisdom. Footnote 2. Let us remember that the first race is shown in occult sciences as spiritual within and ethereal without. The second, psycho-spiritual mentally and ethero-physical bodily. The third, still bereft of intellect in its beginning, is astrophysical in its body and lives an inner life, in which the psycho-spiritual element is in no way interfered with, as yet by the hardly nascent physiological senses. Its two front eyes look before them without seeing either past or future, but the third eye embraces eternity. It is a heavy pollen day today, and my allergies are wild. I haven't had this much trouble with phlegm in a long time. Sorry if I'm having to continuously clear my throat. Says popular wisdom, in vox populi vex die. In the beginning, every class and family of living species was hermaphrodite and objectively one-eyed. Prove that. In the animal, whose form was as ethereal, astrally, as that of man, before the bodies of both began to evolve their coats of skin, vis-a-vis, to evolve from within without, the thick coating of physical substance or matter with its internal physiological mechanism. The third eye was primarily, as in man, the only seeing organ. The two physical front eyes developed, footnote, but in a very different manner to that pictured by Haeckel as an evolution by natural selection in the struggle for existence. The mere thermal sensibility of the skin to hypothetical light waves is absurdly incompetent to account for the beautiful combination of adaptations present in the eye. It has, moreover, been previously shown that natural selection is a pure myth when credited with the origination of variations, as the survival of the fittest can only take place after useful variations have sprung up, together with improved organisms. Whence came the useful variations which developed the eye? Only from blind forces without aim, without design? The argument is puerile. The true solution of the mystery is to be found in the impersonal divine wisdom, in its ideation, reflected through matter. The two physical front eyes developed later on in both brute and man, whose organ of physical sight was, at the commencement of the third race, in the same position as that of some of the blind vertebrata in our day, in example beneath the opaque skin. Footnote 2. paleontology has ascertained that in the animals of the Cenozoic age, the saurians especially, such as the antediluvian Labyrinthodon, whose fossil skull exhibits a perforation otherwise inexplicable, the third or odd eye must have been much developed. Several naturalists, among others E. Kortschelt, feel convinced that whereas, notwithstanding the opaque skin covering it, such an eye in the reptiles of the present period can only distinguish light from darkness, as the human eyes do when bound with a handkerchief or even tightly closed. In the now extinct animals, that eye functioned and was a real organ of vision. Only in the stages of the odd or primeval eye in man and brute are now inverted, as the former has already passed that animal non-rational stage in the third round, and is ahead of a mere brute creation by a whole plane of consciousness. Therefore, while the cyclopean eye was and still is in man the organ of spiritual sight, in the animal it was that of objective vision. And this eye, having performed its function, was replaced in the course of physical evolution from the simple to the complex by two eyes, and thus was stored and laid aside by nature for further use in eons to come. This explains why the pineal gland reached its highest development proportionally with the lowest physical development. There is no reason to believe that that is true, right? There is no reason to believe, right? You can make the logical argument that at one point in time there was more to the pineal gland. But in order to do so, you have to simply use logic. You cannot use any physical evidence whatsoever, because we do not have any physical evidence whatsoever that there was a more developed pineal gland in any human ever in the history of ever. We have no reason to believe that. Now, you can believe it, I believe it, but that doesn't mean that it is not in the realm of speculation, right? We have zero fossil records of an active brain, right, or a brain that we can go through and slice out into and find a pineal gland which was more active. We don't have that. It isn't a non-existent thing, right? Every fossil record that we have has it exactly as it is. Right? And that is accounting for a lot, because most of the time we don't get the soft tissue, right? Our fossil records are generally bones. So there are a couple of brains that have been preserved, but in all of those brains, it has been atrophied. There is no scientific reason to believe that at any point it was more developed than it is now. Now, logically, it doesn't make sense for it to exist and have always been atrophied, right? Maybe we did have a reason for the appendix. Maybe we did have a reason for the spleen. Maybe there was a reason for the pineal gland that is not evident. Maybe what I do is not the pineal gland. I haven't taken it out. It's just that area that I flex, and so I assume that that is where it comes from. For a variety of reasons, and Ra's, the eye of Ra is quite literally a representation of a bisection of the brain. You can find that. And so it is a logical assumption to make that at some point in time there was more physical development. But it is only a logical assumption that you are making. It is not a factual statement that you are stating. Again, I believe it, but that doesn't make it fact. Back to the text. It is the vertebrata in which is the most prominent and objective, and in man it is most carefully hidden and inaccessible, except to the anatomist. No less light is thrown thereby on the future physical, spiritual, and intellectual state of mankind in periods corresponding on parallel lines with other past periods, and always on the lines of ascending and descending cyclic evolution and development. Thus, a few centuries before the Kali Yuga, the Black Age, which began nearly 5,000 years ago, it was said, paraphrased into comprehensible sentences: We, in our first half onward, are in the midpoint, the first and the second races falling downward. Calculate for thyself, Lanu. Now, I intentionally read that without the parentheticals. Okay? We, in our first half onward, are on the midpoint of the first and second races falling downward. Now, we, the fifth root race, in our first half of duration onward, on the now ascending arc of the cycle, are on the midpoint of, or between, the first and second races. Well, that is contradictory to itself with the parentheticals, but not without, right? We, in our first half onward, are on the midpoint of the first and the second races. Well, that makes sense. We, the fifth root race, in the first half onward, are on the midpoint between the first and the second races. Does not make sense. Right? Like you're skipping 3 and 4. What is being said here is that we, in our first half, was between the first and second races. That is self-explanatory. It doesn't need your parentheticals that contradict it. Back to the text. Calculating as advised, we find that during the transitional period, namely in the second half of the first spiritual ethero-astral race, nascent mankind was devoid of the intellectual brain element. As it was on its descending line, as we are parallel to it on the ascending, we are therefore devoid of the spiritual element, which is now replaced by the intellectual. Now we will look at this real quick. Y'all recognize this? I'll give you a number real quick. 0, 0, 1, or it's 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. That's what we're looking at. This is the Fibonacci sequence right here. If you continue this out, it would come down from here and spiral in to about right here or so. Yeah, y'all can see that. That's interesting. For remember, well, as we are in the Manasa period of our cycle of races, or in the fifth, we have therefore crossed the meridian point of the perfect adjustment of spirit and matter, or that equilibrium between brain intellect and spiritual perception. One important point has, however, to be borne in mind. We are only in the fourth round, and it is in the fifth that the full development of Manas as a direct ray from the universal Mahat, a ray unimpeded by matter, will finally be reached. Nevertheless, as every subrace and nation have their cycles and stages of developmental evolution repeated on a smaller scale, it must be the more so in the case of a root race. Our race, then, has, as a root race, crossed the equatorial line and is cycling onward on the spiritual side. But some of our subraces will still find themselves in the shadowy descending arc of their respective national cycles, while others, again, the oldest, having crossed their crucial point, which alone decides whether a race, a nation, or a tribe will live or perish, are at the apex of spiritual development as sub-races. It becomes comprehensible now, while the odd eye has been gradually transformed into a simple gland, after the physical fall of those we have agreed to call the Lemurians. I have not agreed to call them that. Right? I believe that Lemuria was a thing, but we do not have any evidence for it. There are no historical records of this place, right? The Indians, I believe, probably came from there, as well as the Persians, the Midianites and those, the peoples of the islands of the Pacific, right? I believe that those all came from Lemuria, but there is zero historical reason to believe that. It is a curious fact that it is, especially in human beings, that the cerebral hemispheres and the lateral ventricles have been developed, and that the optic thalami, corpora quadrigemina, and corpora striatia are the principal parts which are developed in the mammalian brain. Moreover, it is asserted that the intellect of any man may to some extent be gauged by the development of the central convolutions and the forepart of the cerebral hemispheres. It would seem a natural corollary that if the development and increased size of the pineal gland may be considered to be an index of the astral capacities and spiritual proclivities of any man, there will be a corresponding development of that part of the cranium, or an increase in the size of the pineal gland at the expense of the hinder part of the cerebral hemispheres. I would be interested to know, even though I would not be able to, how mine looks. It is a curious speculation which would receive a confirmation in this case. We should see, below and behind, the cerebellum, which has been held to be the seat of all the animal proclivities of a human being, and which is allowed by science to be the great center for all the physiologically coordinated movements of the body, such as walking, eating, etc., etc. In front, the forepart of the brain, the cerebral hemispheres, the part especially connected with the development of the intellectual powers in man, and in the middle, dominating them both, and especially the animal functions, the developed pineal gland, in connection with the more highly evolved or spiritual man. It must be remembered that these are only physical correspondences, just as the ordinary human brain is the registering organ of memory, but not memory itself. This is, then, the organ which gave rise to so many legends and traditions, among others, to that of man with one head but two faces. These may be found in several Chinese works, besides being referred to in the Chaldean fragments. Apart from the work already cited, the Shanghai King, compiled by King Kia, from engravings on 9 urns made 2255 BC, by the Emperor Yu, they may be found in another work, called the Bamboo Books, and in a third one, the Raya, initiated according to tradition by Cao Kung, uncle of Wu Wang, the first emperor of the Cao dynasty, BC 1122, says Mr. Charles Gould in his Mythical Monsters. The Bamboo Books contain the ancient annals of China found, AD 279, at the opening of the grave of King Xiang of Wei, who died BC 295. Both these works mention men with 2 faces on one head, one in front and one behind. Now, that which the students of occultism ought to know is that the third eye is indissolubly connected with karma. The tenet is so mysterious that very few have heard of it. Now, before we move into that, I want to talk about this real quick, because if you are unaware, we have these things called conjoined twins. Sometimes that appears as 2 heads. We have seen that. Right? Sometimes you get extra arms. We have seen that. It is entirely possible that there is 2 faces, right? In the exact same manner, the exact same physical laws bringing it into existence as Siamese twins, conjoined twins. I know Siamese is not the proper way to refer to it. It is outdated. But that is how most people know it, as opposed to conjoined. That mechanic would absolutely allow this to happen. That mechanic is also, generally speaking, somewhat aligned with incest. Now that which the students of occultism should know is that the third eye is indissolubly connected with karma. That is a little less obvious to me, right? As somebody who works with the third eye, I don't know about that. The eye of Siva did not become entirely atrophied before the close of the 4th race, when spirituality and all the divine powers and attributes of the Deva man of the 3rd had been made the handmaidens of the newly awakened physiological and psychic passions of the physical man. Instead of the reverse, the I lost its powers. But such was the law of evolution, and it was, in strict accuracy, no fall. The sin was not in using those newly developed powers, but in misusing them, in making of the tabernacle, designed to contain a God, the fane of every spiritual iniquity. And if we say sin, it is merely that everyone should understand our meaning, as the term karma, footnote, karma is a word of many meanings and has a special term for almost every one of its aspects. It means, as a synonym of sin, the performance of some action for the attainment of an object of worldly, hence selfish, desire, which cannot fail to be hurtful to someone else. Karman is an action, the cause, and karma, again, is the law of ethical causation, the effect of an act produced egotistically, when the great law of harmony depends on altruism. That is not quite correct either. Again, you are meant to find balance, and altruism is not balanced. As the term karma would be the right one to use in this case, while the reader who would feel perplexed at the use of the term spiritual instead of physical iniquity is reminded of the fact that there can be no physical iniquity. The body is simply the irresponsible organ, the tool of the psychic, if not of the spiritual man. While in the case of the Atlanteans, it was precisely the spiritual being which sinned, the spirit element being still the master principle in man in those days. Thus, it is in those days that the heaviest karma of the fifth race was generated by our monads. As this sentence may again be found puzzling, it is better that it should be explained for the benefit of those who are ignorant of the theosophical teachings. Questions with regard to karma and rebirths are constantly offered, and a great confusion seems to exist upon this subject. Those who are born and bred in the Christian faith and have been trained in the idea that a new soul is created by God for every newly born infant are among the most perplexed. They ask whether in such case the number of incarnating monads on earth is limited, to which the answer is, to which they are answered in the affirmative. For, however countless in our conceptions the number of the incarnating monads, even if we take into account the fact that ever since the second race, when their respective 7 groups were furnished with bodies, several births and deaths must be allowed for every second of time in the eons already past, still there must be a limit. It was stated that Karma Nemesis, whose bondmaid is nature, adjusted everything in the most harmonious manner, and that, therefore, the fresh pouring in or arrival of new monads had ceased as soon as humanity had reached its full physical development. No fresh monads have incarnated since the middle point of the Atlanteans. Hence, remembering that, save in the case of young children and of individuals whose lives were violently cut off by some accident, no spiritual entity can reincarnate before a period of many centuries has elapsed. Such gaps alone must show that the number of monads is necessarily finite and limited. Moreover, a reasonable time must be given to other animals for their evolutionary progress. Okay, so, no. There is no law saying that when you die, you can't come back tomorrow, right? If there is, I'm unaware of it. I do believe that you can come back, right? I don't believe you are forced to, even if you have karmic debt. I don't believe that's the way the mechanics work. I talk about this often, right? But we are here on a voluntary basis. This is something that was directly revealed to me. You don't have to believe it. Take it with a grain of salt. I am fine with that. What was revealed to me was that the soul is eternal. Not just kinda, but really. That it existed somewheres prior to incarnation. That it will go somewheres after the incarnation. This incarnation is not the permanent part, but it is something that you voluntarily chose to come and do. All of the lessons that you learn when you are here, you chose to learn. Even the hard ones, even the ones that really, really fucking suck. You chose to be here. That is a fundamental concept that I believe in due to a direct revelation to me. It is directly contradictory to all of these systems, right? The argument that there is a limited number of souls, that is possible. What that number is, I have no clue. We currently have more people living on the planet now than has existed cumulatively throughout history, right? I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that, right? The doubling that happens every so often happens more actively now than it ever has before. The population of the planet is extraordinarily more than it ever has been. And so, at a minimum, that means that there are, 3 billion souls, 4 billion souls? Now, there are other theories. There are the theory of the single electron, which would mean that we all share a soul, all simultaneously being incorporated at different points and different periods spatially, but in actuality, all the same soul in a different experience. So it's possible that there's only one soul. It is possible that there are souls that are held back from reincarnating, but we don't have any proof of that. It is possible that they immediately reincarnate. We don't have any proof of that. What I hold is because of personal revelation, and it comports with logical things, right? It is logical that you are here. It is logical that you chose to be here. You may not agree with that, but it is a logical argument that can be made. It is logical that if you are here, that you may have been somewhere prior, right? You are not the body. Your body will still be here when you have left it. That we know. Now, whether or not that soul departs and goes back to source, or whether it goes to purgatory, or whether it goes to heaven or hell, those are things we can argue about. We cannot argue about the fact that once, at some point, you will not exist, right? The physical incarnation that is you right now will not exist. It is our assumption that that continues, and because of that assumption, we make a variety of guesses, right? This is a guess. Just as much as my direct revelation, which I saw, and I already explained how that is weird, that is still a speculation, right? That is not something that is provable. That is something we can speculate upon. It is something I can stand firm in. But it is something that almost certainly will never be proven. That's just something important to keep in mind as we go forward, right? This is possible. What she is proposing here is a possibility, but it is not by any means the only possibility or even the most likely. There is no reason to assume a reasonable time must be given to other animals for their evolutionary process. There's no reason to believe that. There is no reason to believe that there is a gap that is required before you can be reincarnated. And I don't care what source material wrote it down. Once again, nobody was here at creation. Back to the text. Hence, the assertion that many of us are now working off the effects of the evil karmic causes produced by us in Atlantean bodies. I disagree with this. The law of karma is inextricably interwoven with that of reincarnation. And I have given extensive talks about this before, so I'm not going to do it now, but the choice is most likely there. It is only the knowledge of the constant rebirths of one and the same individuality throughout the life cycle. The assurance that the same monads, among whom are many dying Kohans, or the gods themselves, fucking ridiculous, have to pass through these circles of necessity, rewarded or punished by such rebirth for the suffering endured or crimes committed in the former life. That those very monads, which entered the empty, senseless shells or astral figures of the first race, emanated by the Pitras, are the same who are now amongst us, nay, ourselves, perchance. It is only this doctrine, we say, that can explain to us the mysterious problem of good and evil, wrong, and reconcile man to the terrible and apparent injustice of life, wrong. Nothing but such certainty can quiet our revolted sense of justice. For when one unacquainted with the noble doctrine looks around him and observes the inequalities of birth and fortune, of intellect and capacities, when one sees honor paid fools and profligates on whom fortune has heaped her favors by mere privilege of birth, and their nearest neighbor with all of his intellect and noble virtues, far more deserving in every way, perishing of want and for lack of sympathy, when one sees all this and has to turn away, helpless to relieve the undeserved suffering, one's ears ringing and heart aching with the cries of pain around him, that blessed knowledge of karma alone prevents him from cursing life and men, as well as their supposed creator. Wrong. Footnote. Objectors to the doctrine of karma should recall the fact that it is absolutely out of the question to attempt a reply to the pessimist on other data. A firm grasp of the principles of karmic law knocks away the whole basis of the imposing fabric reared by the disciples of Schopenhauer and Van Hartman. I wish she was here to argue with me. Of all the terrible blasphemies and accusations virtually thrown on their God by the monotheist, none is greater or more unpardonable than that, almost always, false humility which makes the presumably pious Christian assert, in connection with every evil and undeserved blow, that such is the will of God. Dolts and hypocrites, blasphemers and impious Pharisees, who speak in the same breath of the endless merciful love and care of their God and Creator for helpless man, and that of God scourging the good, the very best of his creatures, bleeding them to death like an insatiable Moloch. Shall we be answered in this, in Congreve's words? But who shall dare tax eternal justice? Logic and common sense, we answer, if we are made to believe in the original sin in one life, and this earth only for every soul, and an anthropomorphic deity who seems to have created some men only for the pleasure of condemning them to eternal hellfire, and this whether they are good or bad, says the predestinarian, footnote 2, the doctrine and theology of Calvinists, the purpose of God from eternity respecting all events, which becomes fatalism and kills free will or any attempt of exerting it for good. It is the pre-assignment or allotment of men to everlasting happiness or misery, kind of like karma. A noble and encouraging doctrine, this. Why should not every man endowed with reasoning powers condemn in his turn such a villainous deity? Life would become unbearable if one had to believe in the God created by man's unclean fancy. Luckily, he exists only in human dogmas and in the unhealthy imagination of some poets, who believe they have solved the problem by addressing him as, "Thou great mysterious power, who hast involved the pride of human wisdom to confound the daring scrutiny and prove the faith of thy presuming creatures." Truly, a robust faith is required to believe that it is presumption to question the justice of one who creates helpless little man but to perplex him, and to test a faith with which that power, moreover, may have forgotten, if not neglected, to endow him, as happens sometimes. Compare this blind faith with the philosophical belief based on every reasonable evidence and life experience in karma nemesis, or the law of retribution. This law, whether conscious or unconscious, predestines nothing and no one. That's not true. It predestines that you have a debt to pay. It exists from and in eternity, truly, for it is eternity itself. And as such, since no act can be co-equal with eternity, it cannot be said to act, for it is action itself. It is not the wave which drowns a man, but the personal action of the wretch, who goes deliberately and places himself under the impersonable actions of the laws that govern the ocean's motions. Karma creates nothing, nor does it design. It is man who plans and creates causes, and karmic law adjusts the effects, which adjustment is not an act, but universal harmony, tending ever to resume its original position, like a bow, which, bent down too forcibly, rebounds with its corresponding vigor, the law of returns. If it happens to dislocate the arm that tried to bend it out of its natural position, shall we say that it is the bow which broke our arm, or that our own folly has brought us to grief? Karma has never sought to destroy intellectual and individual liberty, like the God invented by the monotheist. Tell that to the castes, right? To the untouchables in India. Tell them that karma never sought to destroy intellectual or individual liberty. Tell that to them. And yes, I know that that is human inaction of it, and that it is completely baseless. Back to the text. It has not involved its decrees in darkness purposely to perplex man, nor shall it punish him who dares to scrutinize its mysteries. On the contrary, he who unveils through study and meditation its intricate paths and throws light on those dark ways, in the windings of which so many men perish owing to their ignorance of the labyrinth of life, is working for the good of his fellow men. Karma is an absolute and eternal law of the world of manifestation, and as there can only be one absolute, as one eternal, ever-present cause, believers in karma cannot be regarded as atheists or materialists, still less as fatalists. I don't know where this footnote was. Did I miss it? There's a footnote here, but it was not marked, so I'm going to skip it. For karma is one with the unknowable, of which it is an aspect in its effects in the phenomenal world. Intimately, or rather indissolubly, connected with karma, then, is the law of rebirth, or of the reincarnation of the same spiritual individuality in a long, almost interminable series of personalities. The latter are like the various costumes and characters played by the same actor, with each of which the actor identifies himself and is identified by the public, for the space of a few hours. The inner, or real man, who personates these characters, knows the whole time that he is Hamlet for a brief space of a few acts, which represent, however, on the plane of human illusion, the whole life of Hamlet. And he knows that he was, the night before, King Lear, the transformation in his turn of the Othello of a still earlier preceding night. But the outer, visible character is supposed to be ignorant of the fact. In actual life, that ignorance is, unfortunately, but too real. Nevertheless, the permanent individuality is fully aware of the fact, though, through the atrophy of the spiritual eye in the physical body, that knowledge is unable to impress itself on the consciousness of the false personality. The possession of a physical third eye, we are told, was enjoyed by the men of the third root race down to nearly the middle period of the third sub-race of the fourth root race, when the consolidation and perfection of the human frame made it disappear from the outward anatomy of man. Cyclically and spiritually, however, its mental and visual perceptions lasted till nearly the end of the fourth race, when its functions, owing to the materiality and depraved condition of mankind, died out altogether before the submersion of the bulk of the Atlantean continent. And now we may return to the deluges and their many Noahs. The student has to bear in mind that there were many such deluges that are as that mentioned in Genesis, and three far more important ones, which will be mentioned and described in the section devoted to the subject of prehistoric continents. To avoid erroneous conjectures, that's new. However, in regard with the claim that the esoteric doctrine has much in it of the legends contained in the Hindu scriptures, that, again, the chronology of the latter is almost that of the former, only explained and made clear, and that finally the belief that Vyavasvata Manu, a generic name indeed, was the Noah of the Aryans and his prototype. All this, which is also the belief of the occultist, necessitates at this juncture a new explanation. And that is going to bring us to the end of the races with the third eye. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. There are many things that we speculate about. I speculate about all kinds of things. There are very few things, in fact, that I will hold as fact unless it can be proven empirically, right? Many of the things which I hold as fact, I will still maintain is speculation, despite the fact that it has worked for me, simply because it hasn't been reproduced in anyone else, right? The things that I describe in my book, the energy manipulation that I talk about, as far as I know, there is nobody else doing it that way. The concepts that I talk about, as far as I know, there's nobody else discussing them in that way. It is something that I believe has been revealed to me. I believe that it is a fact, but I will never really come out and be like, this is it. You have to believe me, right? I'm going to tell you my reasoning. I'm going to give you the reasons why I believe the things that I do. And sometimes that is going to be divine revelation. Now, to me, divine revelation and intuition are really close together, right? You can intuit incorrectly. That is a true thing. You can misinterpret your interpretation as divine revelation. That is also a true thing. That is as equally true for me as it is for anyone else. And so, my subjective use of this thing that I believe was revealed to me is not proof, even if it works. It has to be objectified. Somebody else has to be able to replicate it, or else it will remain in speculation, despite the fact that I can talk to you, right? That is proof. I removed the cyst. Now, my vocal cords, I know it's been a long time, but they were stressed for a long time, and they're hard to rework. But I can talk. I have, through the things that I said here, the things that I put in my book, healed my throat. I still have issues. It is not full and complete. I don't act like it is. But the process that I use is replicable. You can take the things that I have written and enact them in your own life, and if they work, then we can start talking about proof. Then we can start talking about objectivity as opposed to subjectivity. Until it has been proven in other people, even the things that I know have worked for me will remain speculation. My standard is, if you are going to assert things and it's speculation, just maintain it's speculation. Don't try to assert that it's fact. Many of the things that she says as fact have been proven wrong, right? We've dealt with that quite extensively through this study and Isis Unveiled. Many of the things that she thought was true wasn't, right? At this point in time, helium was still theoretical, right? It had not yet been isolated. They didn't have the periodic table. There were many pieces of knowledge that we have now that they didn't then. We can, therefore, go through and correct things. And that's what I'm trying to do, right? I'm not really trying to cast aspersion on her for doing the best that she could with the knowledge that she had. My main problem is that she asserts so forcefully that she is correct, even for things that have been later proven untrue. The things that I assert may be proven untrue, but until they are, I can believe them. Once they are proven, then we can talk about fact. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was said, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like, or if you have another work that you would like to see me read or discuss, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. Chip in with a membership or buy a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.